This presentation will discuss the Title I Part A requirement related to the Schoolwide Program Plan Stakeholders, which has been selected for review as part of the program monitoring validation process being conducted by the Federal Program Compliance Division at the Texas Education Agency. Documenting overall compliance for a program requirement may require several forms of documentation to be maintained locally and available upon request by TEA and/or an auditor. To ensure the overall compliance with program requirements, LEAs should refer to the program guide and/or other program-related resources that reference the multiple forms of documentation required to be maintained locally. The documentation requested for submission during the program monitoring validation process may not include all forms of documentation that are required to be maintained locally. The Title I Part A statute specifies that the school-wide program plan must be developed with the involvement of parents and other members of the community to be served, as well as individuals who will carry out the plan, including teachers, principals, other school leaders, paraprofessionals, administrators, including administrators of the Title I Part C and Title I Part D programs if the LEA has those programs, LEA administrators, tribes and tribal organizations if present in the community, and if appropriate, specialized instructional support personnel, technical assistance providers, school staff, students if the plan relates to a secondary school, and other individuals determined by the school. Please also note that the statutory language includes plural references, which means that there would need to be more than one stakeholder involved for the groups referenced. During our review, we will particularly be looking for the following required groups of stakeholders: parents, other members of the community to be served, teachers, principals, other school leaders, and paraprofessionals present in the school, administrators of the Title I Part C and Title I Part D programs, tribes and tribal organizations present in the community, and if the plan relates to a secondary school, students. For item 1.1, the LEA must submit evidence of the required stakeholder involvement. Acceptable documentation may include the relevant pages of the Campus Improvement Plan for the specified school year that includes a list of the stakeholders involved in the development of the plan and the group or role they represent. Please note that LEA employees may not fill the parent roles on the committee. Issues that may result in an improvement needed status include: auditable documentation requested was not submitted, documentation submitted does not include the individuals by name, documentation submitted does not include the stakeholder roles for each individual listed, the documentation was not for the school year or the campus specified. The documentation required for the CIP items 1.2, 1.3, and 1.4 includes meeting agendas, meeting minutes or notes, and participant rosters or sign-in sheets for one meeting held during the campus planning process, documenting the involvement of the required stakeholders in the development of the school-wide program plan. Although it is highly unlikely that the CIP development process would take place in one meeting, considering that the process should be comprehensive in nature, we are only requesting the documentation for one meeting. The documentation submitted should provide evidence that the CIP stakeholders listed in the documentation referenced in CIP item 1.1 were involved in the CIP development process. The standard documentation for a meeting includes a meeting agenda, meeting notes or minutes, and sign-in sheets or participant rosters that indicate attendance. These are the items that we will be examining as 1.2, 1.3, and 1.4. The meeting agenda from the campus planning process should provide evidence that the required stakeholders were involved in the development of the school-wide program plan. The meeting notes or minutes should align with a list of stakeholders involved. They should also provide evidence that the required stakeholders were involved in the development of the school-wide program plan. The participant roster or sign-in sheet showing the attendance should include the meeting title, the meeting date, the stakeholder names and roles of the stakeholders involved. Documentation for virtual meetings is acceptable. Given the increased use of virtual meeting environments, participant rosters that include the meeting title, meeting date, and stakeholder names and roles would be acceptable substitutes for the more traditional sign-in sheets. This eliminates the need of participant signatures for virtual meetings. In general, to be acceptable as meeting documentation, an agenda should include the title of the meeting, the name of the campus or LEA as applicable, and the date and the time of the meeting. Best practice would be to also include the meeting location. Meeting notes or meeting minutes should include the meeting title, the LEA or campus name as applicable, and the date and the time of the meeting. Best practice would be to include the meeting location and the names and roles of the stakeholders. The participant roster or sign-in sheet should include the meeting title, the LEA or campus name as applicable, the date and the time of the meeting, and the stakeholder names and roles. Best practice would be to include the location of the meeting. Please note that the Texas Education Code states that parents' roles as stakeholders may not be filled by LEA employees. Issues with the meeting documentation that may result in an improvement needed status include auditable documentation requested was not submitted, the documentation submitted does not reference the school-wide program plan development process, the documentation submitted does not align to the list of stakeholders referenced in the item 1.1, and documentation submitted is not related to the school-wide program plan for the school year designated in the validation. Questions related to the program monitoring validations for the Title I Part A program may be directed to Vivian Smurl at essasupport@tea.texas.gov.